Hello and welcome to the show, The Debate. I'm Sana Maqbool, your host for this show at PTV WORLD. Of course, at The Debate, we discuss top stories within the world and in Pakistan and try to bring you a complete picture. In today's show, we will be talking about two important stories, something that we have slightly touched upon yesterday as well, which is regarding the statement by the government regarding the use of EVMs in the next general elections. We know that the Information Minister, Fawad Chaudhry, has given a statement regarding the funding for ECP in the next elections to be stopped if the EVMs that have been passed by the joint session of the Parliament will not be used. We of course know, and we've discussed this at length in our shows as well, that there were a lot of reservations from different parties, from within the ally parties as well, and then of course the opposition had a lot of reservations regarding EVMs and I-voting. Despite that, however, these laws these amendments to the Act have been passed by the joint session of the Parliament, and yet we understand that there are issues and concerns that are being raised by the ECP with regards to the use of EVMs. How we see this moving forward, what does the law say, what steps can the government take, what options does the ECP have in this regard, is what we're going to explore further, and then obviously also get an angle out of the opposition parties as well. We will also be taking a look at, of course, the situation in India, which keeps on worsening as time goes by. We've also talked about this many times in the show before as well. We know the extent to which human rights violations are going on in India at the moment, but they keep on increasing. More coordinated approaches and campaigns come out at the forefront. Discrimination against different celebrities and important personalities. Then, of course, the curbing of freedom of expression. We talked about Farrukh's shows being cancelled. We know that another comedian's show have also been cancelled. And there is a joke about how at least there is equality from the government in this regard. We also have a very disturbing statement coming from the Chief of Defence Staff of India regarding lynchings and how they are a positive sign. This, of course, we will explore in further detail as to the kind of repercussions that such a statement has, what sort of a meaning is implied from these statements, what exactly is the kind of justifications that may perhaps be given to different crowds, and the fact that maybe lynching a terrorist is not against human rights, and other such statements that have been coming out, which are of course not only provocative, but they're also highly irresponsible and have consequences, many of which of course we still do not see India facing. But that is the hope. We will be talking about the topic related to, of course, the reaction to Fawad Chaudhry's statement and the government talking about funding of ECP before we talk about anything else. For this, of course, we have Mr. Farrukh Pitafi and Mr. Faisal with us on the show, as usual. Thank you for being with us, gentlemen. And then we also have Dr. Irfanullah Khan, who's the Senator at PMLN. Thank you for joining us on the show. Dr. Irfan, I'm going to start with you. The discussion regarding, of course, the statement and then the use of EVMs in the general elections. We know that the opposition parties have had their reservations regarding the use of EVMs, but now that this has been passed by the joint session of the Parliament, is this not the way to go forward?
First of all, thank you very much. First of all, my name is Afnanullah Khan, not Irfan. With regards to the statement of the government pertaining to the EVM bill, and also the statement of the government yesterday, where Fawad Chaudhry came along and he said that they will stop funding of ECP if the elections are not conducted by using EVMs. I found them highly irresponsible. Today, just right like a few, like half an hour ago, another federal, another government minister, Shibli Faraz, came along and he said that the Prime Minister went for like prayers during the cabinet meeting, and during that meeting there was a casual discussion about stopping funding of ECP. And there was no like the Prime Minister was not on board on this statement. So I mean, you can imagine the height of irresponsibility by the Information Minister when he came out and he said it was a decision of the cabinet, whereas the other federal minister is saying that the Prime Minister was not even present at the time when this discussion happened. So I mean, there's a big problem. there's a big
Farrukh Pitafi. I understand that most of the opposition parties want to talk about the government and how it is doing. The question at this moment is because your opposition parties actually were present in the parliament on the day all these laws were passed. Why is it that the opposition seems to be failing to do something about it? It keeps on agitating all the points through the media, but why are you failing in the parliament?
we are not failing in the parliament. If I tell you, like for instance, just 1 week before the joint session, the government moved like two private bills in the National Assembly, and both of those private bills were defeated. The government got votes of 107 and the opposition got votes of about 115. But in 1 week's time, through some magic and through the use of establishment, the government was able to get votes of 174 from the National Assembly. So the problem remains, the problem is not with us
Making these
agitating.
claims, sir, but can
The
you
problem is,
substantiate them? I mean, we all can say, I mean, angels would have actually descended on ground, but the fact is that it is very easy to say, accuse somebody, but do you have any proof of that?
no, I mean, if you have no idea about Pakistani politics, or if you
I do,
have
but I
zero
also have
background
the idea that you were in government as
Pakistani
well.
politics, or if you don't know the history of Pakistan, if you don't know how elections are conducted, then I mean there is nothing I can do. I mean, I'm not here to educate someone who doesn't know nothing. I
Okay,
mean,
thank you.
if you don't know how what Saqib Nisar said, and how the elections were managed, so I mean there is very little anyone can do about that. And the fact remains that how on earth the government managed to got 174 votes from the National Assembly, although the parliament, even Dr. Amir Liaquat on record, who is an MNA of PTI, on record he said that I was not coming here, but I was forced to come over here to give vote. So,
Dr. Afnan, Dr. Afnan, another ignorant here in the studio. I just wanted to know, when you say establishment, what do you mean by that? And if you have mentioned Amir Liaquat, Dr. Amir Liaquat, when you say that he was, referring to people who has actually brought to him, he has explained in a couple of videos that who he was talking about. He was talking about few friends. And could you please further elaborate when you say that establishment was involved? Who was involved? What do you mean by that?
the establishment comprised of the top brass of the military and the intelligence services. That's
Right.
the establishment in Pakistan.
Once
And-
again, I
and-
would say,
and-
do you have any proof?
No, I mean,
Right.
look, I mean, if you,
Okay, let us
if
come back
you,
to the
if
present,
you,
right?
you should
Absolutely.
read a
Mr.
few books before
Afnan.
you come here.
Mr. Afnan, let us talk about the use of EVMs, and of course, the understanding here is that in a democratic setup we have responsible government and a responsible opposition as well, and for that, of course, we need to see the way forward in terms of what is better for the progress of the nation and how a transparent and fair election at what is needed. Now, with regards to EVMs, we understand that there were reservations in the past. The fact that the joint session has now passed them, and this is something which is going to help improve the ECP conduct its general elections. The kind of response that we're still getting from the opposition parties seems to curtail this process from going forward. And then we don't even have a joint stance coming from them. We've seen different opposition parties talk about different things. A certain video also came out recently in which we have different parties blaming each other. Whereas the opposition that we need for a democratic setup is one which has a joint responsible stance.
The opposition can, it would be a good thing if the opposition is joined, but it is not like in all democracies all the oppositions are united. There are different parties in the opposition and they all have their own stance. And as far as the EVM bill is concerned, I was part of the parliamentary committee, standing committee on parliamentary affairs, where we have discussed the whole bill in detail with the government, and there were issues within the bill that we highlighted at that time. There were some things within the bill that we said we can support the government on, but because this government is immature and they don't know how legislation works. I mean, for instance, let me give you an example. In 2017, we did the Election Act 2017, and at that time, PMLN had 2/3 majority with the alliance. We could have actually passed anything. We could have even amended the constitution, but we went to all the opposition parties, including PTI, to come up with an Act 2017. So, and this time around, they have come up with a bill. It's not even an amendment within the constitution, and in that bill, they have made law. They've made a law which is not uh, which is not aligned with the constitution of Pakistan. So, for instance, the constitution of Pakistan mandates that the election commission is responsible for holding free and fair election. They are the body who will do that. But if now what they've done is that they've given a lot of powers to Nadra, for instance, and they want Nadra to make voter list. Although we told them that this is something that is not aligned with the constitution of Pakistan, but they didn't listen to us. So it is no, and the second thing which is more important is that the law that PTI came up with states that the government, the ECP will use EVM for general elections.
Right.
It doesn't say that.
Dr. Saab, these are good points. And before you got sentimental, I was just recalling that your father had late father, a benefactor of my programs as well, never had a problem in educating us. I hope you realize that whatever question comes to you comes from a good place, not a bad one. But the reason why I asked about the failure in the parliament and inability to do it, and now I'm going to ask you about a counterpoint or any kind of model or modality that your party can offer in rebuttal to the EVMs. I want to understand, do you think that use of machines will actually spoil the elections? You realize that there are problems with the electoral system. So what is your counter proposal?
We have given a detailed counter proposal to the government, and we have told them that EVM is not an anti-rigging system. It is an automation system. I hold a PhD in information security from the top university in the world. I've been to University of Oxford. So when I'm not only I was part of the parliamentary committee as a subject matter expert when we were discussing this bill, and I can tell you, I can assure you that it is not an anti-rigging system. It is automation of the manual process. And you can, if you can manipulate the manual process, you can also manipulate. You can more easily, in fact, manipulate the EVMs. And one of the ways that we have explained to the government how to do it.
What is your solution to the problem of rigging?
So our solution to the problem of rigging is non-interference within the election process of the establishment. That's the number one. Until that happens, it is whether you have EVMs, no EVMs, the election process will not be democratic. It will always be, there will always be problems. So that's number one. The second is the fact that we need to ensure that the all existing laws. So, for instance, like I was running for election from Karachi in 2018, and my polling agents were kicked out from the polling stations in the morning, and then I put them back in. Then they were kicked out again in the evening when the votes were being counted. So so what kind of law can stop that? There is no law. When you have people who have guns who take over polling stations, which law are you going to use to get them out? This is unfortunate, and it is what has happened in our history. So the way to proceed is to ensure that these kind of things doesn't happen.
Right.
And it's not the law which is failing. It is the implementation
Dr.
of the law.
Before I yield through you, let me just submit to all the opposition parties that have been in government that when you keep on saying that people actually come into power with the help or connivance of anything called establishment, that actually implies that when you came into power, that also was a factor, right? So it is not a good reflection on democratic process. My humble submission is that whatever evidences we have, we should be taking that to the courts, but I yield back to Sana.
And we, of course, also need to further investigate and understand the process that the Election Commission is moving towards. Of course, it has the responsibility of a transparent and fair election, and that it is an independent organization to do so. So all of the combined efforts go towards making sure that we have a general election that is more transparent and fair. Faisal, we earlier, of course, also were discussing about how the ECP under Article 222 can perhaps reject these amendments to the law, even if they are passed by the joint session of the Parliament. Considering that the ECP has such options, do you think that the government's statement or the government's decision of stopping funding is something that they can see through?
Yeah, I think we are already seeing that this statement would be coming later on, an amended statement, or they will be looking into it. But I believe, yes, there are certain laws, certain articles that are protecting ECP, empowering ECP. ECP has the say, the last say, and it is an independent body. And to me, I think there will be reverse statements coming from the government side as well.
Explainers.
Right now, what the government needs to do is they need to, I think, sit with the opposition as well, and to talk to ECP as well. Talk to ECP and try to get a solution out.
Right.
Faisal, we've also been joined by the Information Minister, Mr. Fawad Chaudhary. Thank you very much for joining us on the debate. Sir, of course, we are discussing the use of EVMs in the next general elections, and in particular also your statement regarding the stopping of funding to the Election Commission if the EVMs are not put to use in the next general elections. Sir, if you could please, for us and our viewers, also help us understand what exactly do you mean when you say that, and if the EVMs are not going to be used by the ECB in the general elections, will the funds actually be stopped?
Well, as I said yesterday, your government acts under law, so is ECP. So now the law says that the elections should be held through EVM, electronic voting machine. So in our view, the law minister is of the view that if elections are not held on EVM, then there will be problem for the government to release funding for the conduct of elections. So, but I believe that the Election Commission has, is working on introduction of EVMs, and they have already constituted committees in this regard, which I believe is a step in the right direction. And I will believe that with the seriousness that Election Commission has shown for holding elections through EVM, this issue will be resolved, and next election we will be able to convert through on the method of EVM.
Right. Considering the Article 222 and 220, do you think that the Election Commission of Pakistan, there is a possibility that they may not be putting the EVMs to use despite it being passed in the joint session? Is that a possibility?
220 is not about the method of elections. It's about the holding of elections. So the conduct of election is subject to the law, and law is what the Parliament has just declared through election amendment in Election Order 2017. So after the law, Article 220 has to be read with this new sections inserted in 2017 law. So there is no quibble with the proposition that the new elections has to be held on EVM.
Right. Fawad Chaudhary Sahab, since we are talking about procurement and deployment of EVMs in the election, I wanted your opinion on what it entails. The modalities, do you have a number figure regarding how much government is going to spend on the procurement, or ECP is going to spend on procurement of EVMs and training and deployment and everything, and regarding the timelines as well, sir? And finally, if possible, whether it is going to be produced by the government of Pakistan. You have been Minister for Science in the past as well, and these were your models which were actually presented for preview. So is it going to be private companies which are going to actually partake this process, or the government of Pakistan will produce them?
No, I don't think the government will be able to produce EVMs, or government will get into the business of manufacturing. This should be left on the private manufacturers, Election Commission, what Election Commission of Pakistan is to do is they must come up with RFPs or the demand in election that what kind of machines they are looking for, and they have already came up with 36 conditionalities that they want machines to fulfill. They should just go with their demand to the manufacturers that they want EVMs in this number, and that should qualify to the conditionalities they should by election commission. And then the private companies will obviously come forward and submit their solutions.
All right. Any estimates about how much will it cost the exchequer?
In the last national election, costed about 27 billion rupees. So I don't think so. It would be more or less the same.
Mr. Fawad, considering, of course, that we have seen the opposition stance throughout the time when these bills were proposed, to the time they were passed, and up till now, there have been conflicting statements that have been coming, and we've seen that within the parties as well, there is discord and different stances coming up. But one would assume that after that we've seen the passing of these amendments and laws in the joint session, that as a responsible opposition and democratic institution of the state, we see a different kind of response from the opposition parties. What would you have to say regarding the fact that the role of the opposition is not just limited to shooting holes in whatever the government is trying to do, but actually, in effect, also help in taking the step forward?
This is what I actually said even today. That, we all want amendments in the election process. We all want election process to be free and fair and transparent. But if you don't like government conditionalities or you don't like government proposals, you must come up with your own proposals. Right now, the opposition role is actually only of a spoiler. So what they do is only whatever we try to do, they just want to spoil that by their really illogical criticism. But they have not come up with any proposal up till now that what really want. How can we improve electoral system? So this is a problem that I think this is a continuous problem.
Right, Dr. Afnan, since this, of course, is a debate, I'd also like to give you a chance to respond to that.
Sir, you'll have to unmute your mic. Continue, Dr. No.
The cost of the election will not be 27 billion. I think it will be over 100 billion at least when we use because the procurement of the machines, the storage of the machines, the training of the staff, all of that. If you put a cumulative figure to that, it goes at least over 100 billion rupees. And I think in a country where people are dying of hunger, people are committing suicides, the government have this priority where they want to forcefully do elections on EVM, where the opposition is not even on board is ironic, at least. I would repeat what I said before as well, that Mr. Shibli Faraz in his program today, who's also a federal minister, said that this thing that the minister said that they will stop funding of ECP is something that was the Prime Minister was not part of. And if the minister can actually clarify that would be very good, because I mean, one minister is saying another thing, and then the other minister is saying another thing. It's really confusing for everybody else. Also the fact that, as I explained before, that EVM is not an anti-rigging system. It is not a system through which you can stop rigging. It is an automation of the manual process. And if you automate the manual process, you can basically, in fact, you can do more effectively rig the election. So for instance, let me give you an example. When the Ministry of Science and Technology presented their EVM machine, they explained to us how it would work, and it's a long process, so I will just make it really short. And when it calculates the total number of votes, it generates a QR code. The machine will generate a QR code, and the presiding officer will use his mobile phone to read that QR code and then transmit it over the internet to the result transmission system. So, and we remember what happened last in 2018 with the result transmission system. So if I mean, this whole thing can easily be manipulated. So, for instance, if there is a National Assembly election, there are for instance, there are 240 polling stations. You just need to manipulate the results of 15 to 20 polling stations, and the result will be different. So, and that is
Okay,
what we have explained.
point taken, Dr. Afnan. Mr. Fawad Chaudhry, would you please like to respond to that? Mr. Fawad Chaudhry, are you with
Right,
us?
we seem to have lost the connection.
Right. Faisal, you also, I guess, wanted to take part in the conversation and talk about the EVMs, and also perhaps have a question for a respected guest.
Yeah, I had a question related to EVMs. Of course, our worthy guest has concerns over the EVM, that it would be very easy for the government or for the establishment, as he says and as he claims, to rig the elections. But you know, we have been seeing this, that after every elections, there was not a single election where somebody did not raise a finger against. I mean, he himself hails from a party that is still, telling everyone that the election was rigged and the current government is actually a selected one and not the elected one. So I believe if he can clear us, if both of the processes, of course, if the EVM, if it comes and still they might say that rigging take place, and if the previous system is, they have been claiming that rigging takes place, then what's the difference it makes?
Dr. Afnan?
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, so we are saying that the new system is not the right system, as I explained before, because this will in fact facilitate the rigging process. Let me give you an example. If you take the best system in the world, you take, wherever, a German or American or whichever Japanese system in the world, you put garbage in on one side, you will get garbage on the other side. It's garbage in, garbage out. So it's not the system. You have to understand. It is the people who influence the system. It is the people who try to change the results. That is where the problem is. Even if we use the existing system, people were not given Form 45s. If you will not give Form 45s to people who are contesting the elections, they don't know what the result is at the end of the day. So I mean, the laws that we already have are not implemented. That's what the problem is. So coming up with a new law which will facilitate the rigging of the election is not good for us. I mean, and this is the first time in our history that the elections are already controversial. 2 years before the general election, it has already become controversial. Normally, there are charges of rigging and all that after the election. This is the first time it is happening 2 years before the election because of this controversial law that was passed without taking
Thank you, Dr. Afnan, for joining us. Thank you very much for being a part of the show. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for.
Can I give you a comment, if you allow me?
A quick one, please. Yes.
Let me remind everybody who has been watching this channel for past 5 years that in 2014 also, when there were allegations of rigging, I was opposing that momentum as well. And there is a reason why. Pakistan is a budding democracy, and here every effort to improve the quality of electoral process is good, and till the time you prove it in a court of law, any aspersions on the electoral process stand nowhere. So what we have been hearing so far, Sana, earlier, from Dr. Afnan and other, in the past as well from other opposition leaders, the problem is they don't go to the courts. They keep on agitating these, harsh statements, mostly hearsay on television. That doesn't work that way.
Right.
You cannot undermine democracy that way.
And Sana, I just wanted to add in that we have talked about the rigging, but we didn't talk about the pre-poll rigging, especially the pre-poll rigging that is taking place in 133 NA 133
and we
election
discussed that
by-election.
yesterday as well.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Coming back to what we were discussing earlier with regards to the situation in India and of course the human rights violations that have been going on, a statement that of course is quite disturbing is that of the Chief of Defence Staff regarding lynching being a positive sign. We will be talking about the situation in India in further detail. For this we will also be joined by our guests on Skype and online. I'll introduce them as soon as they join us. But let us first talk about the fact that when we say when we make statements from a position of power, from a position of influence, we need to say them with a lot of responsibility and a lot of care in about the impact of our words. And it may seem quite simple to say such a thing, that perhaps it's not a violation of human rights, or perhaps it's okay or even good to lynch people who are terrorists. It is in fact a highly irresponsible statement coming from a person such as the Chief of Defense Staff, and points towards how the Indian regime is perhaps equal to how somebody who wants to flare up at some sort of an action, and gives a reaction of how we should just end it all and finish everybody who's part of the problem, and that will eliminate the problem itself, which of course is not the case. I fail to understand, Faisal and Farrukh, how such a simple thing understood by people, by someone like me, can perhaps not be understood by someone who is a Chief of Defense Staff of a country.
Yeah, Sana, let me start. You know, in 2020, in Galwan, India couldn't fight against China. In 2019, on LOC, India couldn't fight against Pakistan. Now they have come up with an excellent idea. Now they can't fight China, they can't fight Pakistan, but they can fight against their own people. And this is what their plan is. This is what we had to hear from CDS Rawat, and he's been, you know, telling everyone that you know, this is how we should be dealing with the people. So to them, it's not Pakistan or China. Now they have a very good enemy for themselves, and that is the people of India. They want to fight against people of India. And this is what the Hindutva ideology is. They will, one by one, will fight with the whole India.
Right. We have been joined now by Brigadier Retired Rashid Wali Janjua, who is, of course, the acting president. April, thank you very much for joining us, sir. We've also been joined on telephone line by Cynthia Donrich, who's a senior analyst. Thank you very much, both of you, for being with us on the show, The Debate. Mr. Rashid, I'll start with you. We're discussing the situation in India, and particular reference to the statement regarding lynching that has come, of course, from the Chief of Defense Staff of India. When we talk about statements coming from different political leaders and people of influence, we understand that from the Indian side, we've always heard such irresponsible statements coming in. But how these statements can still pass without consequence and without international reaction is still absurd. And the fact that these statements are actually justifying or calling for, even encouraging violence against people, it is something that you think is beyond comprehension by the international community? Is this not clear enough that this is a spreading of hate or violence?
You'll have to unmute your mic, sir.
Everyone does that.
Right. While this goes on, perhaps, we can also talk to the other guest.
Absolutely. Yes, Ms. Cynthia, perhaps the same question you can help us answer and understand.
Sure. This appears to be a clear violation, not only of the growing inter- and interregional disparities that are being fostered and fueled by India's own leadership, but also the essence of nationalism. Poorly implemented tribal policies, lack of proper industrialization. It seems to be a very, very vicious cycle. And frankly, these three leaders, Ajit Doval, and the National Security Advisor, and so forth, they seem to be emerging as what I would describe as a triumvirate of carnate evil incarnate.
Right.
I think we've also lost our connection with Cynthia, but we'll continue our discussion with both Cynthia and Mr. Rashid. Farrukh, yes. Continue.
Right. Earlier I thought that because there are other statements as well, we are going to discuss that in the introduction. Then I will actually start an appreciation club for General Rawat, but I think that will take a back seat because first of all, one has to qualify what is going on in India. There is this very sad but interesting article by Admiral retired L. Ramdas, who was India's naval chief a couple of decades ago. he has written, he has taken exception to not one, but three statements. One that you have actually pointed out, CDS, who's actually appreciating that the people who are lynching, alleged separatists in Kashmir, they are good ones and they are the heroes. The second one was even more frightening. That was from Ajit Doval, India's NSA, who is surprise saying something very interesting. He goes to a police pass-out ceremony and says that, the future challenge or the enemy is going to use, the element that is going to use is civil society. That means all the dissenters, they are the enemies, and even those who might be agreeing with you in the civil society, but who have their own opinion, can be future, enemies as well. Then the head of National, Human Rights Commission actually points out, and that is the last bit I'm going to just add here. He goes and chairs a meeting or a debate whose title it is that human rights, are they a stumbling block in the way of fight against terrorism, by which they mean Islamic extremism and Naxalism? When you are actually head of commission on human rights, and then you are actually saying this, what does that mean?
Absolutely, it's absolutely ridiculous for a debate to be held on something as obvious as that. Can human rights ever be a stumbling block to anything? Is human rights violations ever justified? This is what, of course, the statements that have been coming out from India seem to be saying. So, Faisal, it is also points to the fact that when we see these statements coming up in front, we also see that they justify the fact that they are doing something which is effective in fighting the so-called terrorists, that they would be able to eliminate and, of course, apprehend a culprit within 48 hours or less than that, just because they're able to act with impunity and act as violently as they can. This, of course, is a larger problem, because this means that the way the Indian regime and the forces want to resolve problems is by acting in such a way which is just without any sort of protection or law or any sort of security of human rights and their rights and their ethics.
Yeah. Sana, first of all, we need to understand that these three gentlemen, at the highest positions of India, their statements, the dates of their statements, they are, very near to each other in early November. And this is the time when so much was cooking in India, especially related to the farmers' law, farmers' bill, which was being challenged by the...
it was law. Later on, they retracted it. Yeah.
Exactly. And it was being challenged, and of course, they wanted to use force against them. Number one. Number two, to me, there was another very important thing which was highlighted by the former naval chief in this article, and that was that back in 2019, he plus few of his veterans, they actually they wrote a letter saying that politics should be kept away from the institutions, especially like Indian Army, Naval Force, and all of them. Why? Yeah. Because they could see that it is coming. Right now in Indian Army, it is becoming a practice of the officers. They have started perceiving it that if they are associated with a political party, especially BJP and RSS and all of these offshoots, it would be very easy for them to get promoted. So this is what is happening, and this is alarming for India.
Right. Mr. Rashid Bari, Janju, I hope we can we are able to hear you this time around. My question to you would be, considering the fact we see such statements coming in from military leaders and political leaders within India, and of course they're targeted towards people they claim to be terrorists or anti-nationalist forces. But does this not also point to the fact that when we have decision makers talking so frivolously about human rights and saying lynching is a good thing and whatnot, then their ability to protect the citizens of the country is put at question, whoever it may be?
indeed, you're correct in your assessment. What we need to understand is that it's a confederacy of practitioners of violence that we are confronted with in India. The practitioners egg on the catalysts like police and officers, cadets, while the ideologues like Mohan Bhagwat provide the moral justification. We have only heard Mohan Bhagwat a few days ago once he spoke about undoing the partition, and against that the Foreign Office strongly protested. You see, finally, once this political and ideological conflation takes place, the cover is provided by a BJP government which is propped up by the inveterate haters of minorities, the RSS. We must understand that the dots point out towards a structural violence. Structural violence is a term defined by Joan Galtung, the eminent peace and conflict scholar. He defines that as a structure of inequities established against the underdogs by the top dogs, out of which there is no escape. In this, a physical violence is perpetrated after demonizing a culture through attacks on its cultural symbols and personal belief systems. So they are all playing a game as per a plan that excludes minorities and stamps out the vestiges of pluralism that was a glue that once bound a culturally heterogeneous society like India. We also know that NSA Ajit Doval is a viscerally hateful practitioner of the asymmetric warfare, or now what we call the hybrid warfare. So it's all according to a well choreographed plan that they are proceeding, and the denouement of which I only hope that does not lead to a violent eruption on the line of control or on the China-India border. There is a danger, in fact, which is clear and present danger, and which is an existential threat, because this is an ideology, the likes of Wendy Doniger, Arundhati Roy, they'll tell you very clearly that there is no logic, and when an ideology inspired by mythology starts inspiring the political direction of the country, the danger is not only to the country itself, but to all the regional countries which surround that.
Right. Will you allow me to ask a question, put a question to Cynthia Trichy?
Yes.
Ms. Trichy, since you were earlier talking about what is going on in India, I just wanted your perspective. There are signs upon signs what is going on in India, fascism. Do tell me, why is it that all the champions of democracy fail to notice this all over the world?
Well, this is a political implosion, and they weren't really champions of democracy after all, were they? That was just a superficial label designed to fill their bank account. So we're seeing people are actually proving who they really are, what they really stand for, and what's happening in India is that India could not successfully threaten Pakistan. India could not successfully, will not successfully threaten China. So now the police, the mentality is being mentally hijacked, and they're being operantly conditioned into attacking their own people. So there's a mental lynching of the people, mental hijacking of the police, internal political implosion. This is just a firestorm waiting to happen.
Right, Cynthia, and we also earlier, as we were discussing the kind of strategies that are being employed here and the kind of hate that is being spread, does it also not seem that perhaps the people, the local public itself and their sentiments, whatever they think and however they act, they're also being used as a weapon, as puppets or props to also further the agenda and ideologies of the regime in place? Is this something that perhaps is happening without the knowledge or understanding of the local public?
Unfortunately, so it seems. This is like another psychological operation. They're in the middle of it, and they're not even really fully aware of it because they've been subjugated and dominated for so long that they're even unaware of their own ability to have their own individual unique thought processes and therefore speak out independently as one would be able to in a democratic society.
But let me understand this, Mr. Rashid, perhaps you can answer this question. Considering the fact that we see the operation, we've seen a coordinated media operation going on from the Indian side. They've been exposed many times before with the EU Disinfo Lab and quite recently in a report as well. And then we, of course, see these statements coming from leaders and people of influence. We see that the emotions are played, the people are being used, and how we're earlier talking about psychologically manipulated. When we consider all of these factors together, can we really justify the fact that perhaps an individual or a group of people or a population of a country is not really responsible for its actions? Can we really say that? Are they still not bound to reflect and understand what is going on, what is that needs to be done and should be done?
You must understand, India is in RSS-inspired fear that has also, put off the liberal fringe, and there are spaces within the, liberal value repositories like their cultural think spaces and their academia and Bollywood. We know that how the son of famous actor Farrukh was treated. And we also know that 3 Kashmiris celebrating T20, they were put in the jail and nobody amongst the lawyers community was ready to plead their case. So India is in the grip of a fear, and which is a regimented kind of a fear that has been imposed through shakas and through a structure of violence that has been imposed by RSS. And I think it's the responsibility of the liberal fringe to now get up and speak for itself, because this danger is not only to faiths like Muslims and Sikhs and Christians,
is to all, of course.
But it is also against Dalits. And
absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Brigadier Rashid Wali Chandua and Cynthia Donerty for joining us and being part of the debate. My last question to you, Farrukh, is it fear? Is it just emotion and their own particular beliefs, or is it just plain ignorance that we don't see enough voices raising these concerns?
Right. I think the factors on ground are exactly what Nazis, the people under Nazi regime were actually facing at that time in late 30s and early 40s. But I have very quickly have to point out 2 things, and you can time me. I will try to actually conclude it within a minute.
You have less than that.
Yeah, please look at the clocks.
I'm watching.
Watches. Okay, one thing. General Bipin Rawat was promoted as an army chief against the merit system, which was the seniority principle. He was one exception after ages. And why? Because of the political reason. That's why he is CDS, because he has the supra-opposition which controls everything, right? All armed forces. But I wanted to actually read to you very quickly a list of early signs of fascism, a poster which hangs at the US Holocaust Museum. And this is very important. You can see whether what is going on in India is fascism or not. Powerful and continuing nationalism, disdain for human rights, identification of enemies as unifying cause, supremacy of the military, rampant sexism, controlled mass media, obsession with national security, religion and government intertwined, corporate power protected, labor power suppressed, disdain for intellectuals and the arts, obsession with the crime and punishment, rampant cronyism and corruption, and fraudulent elections. This is what is happening in India. Tell me it is not.
We agree with you, Farrukh. Absolutely. We have no need to tell you it's not, because it is. And we've discussed this many times before, and the world knows it. This is, of course, not a question whether or not the community does not know what is going on in India. Everyone does. The fact remains, of course, is what are they doing about it? Nothing, and that is disappointing. Thank you for watching the debate.